Let's talk about the Jonathan Kuminga situation one more time. It's been the never-ending saga of the summer, but hopefully it's coming to an end very shortly here because Jonathan Kuminga's qualifying offer deadline is coming up on Wednesday. We got media day tomorrow. The Warriors don't really have a team. They need to get a team. I know they're committed to Al Horford and DeAnthony Melton and Gary Payton II, but they don't have a team signed right now. So the Kuminga situation has to get resolved here shortly. And so while there isn't a ton of new news on this Kuminga front, we did hear that the Kings and Warriors have resumed talks, right? They've come back together after a while of not talking. They've come back together and they did talk about a Jonathan Kuminga trade again. Now, from our perspective, what we've heard, the offer from the Kings doesn't seem to have changed very much. It's still Malik Monk and a first round pick that is most likely protected. And of course, the Warriors want an unprotected pick. The Kings don't want to give up an unprotected pick. That is very understandable from both sides. And so, while that, of course, has some impact on whether this trade, sign and trade, gets done or not, the protections on that pick, of course, matter. I think the bigger thing that matters is really Malik Monk's value. I think Malik Monk is really the centerpiece to this entire thing, what his value is, both to the Warriors and around the NBA. Because the holdup for the Warriors really is all about the dollars, right? They bringing in a guy in Malik Monk who's making $18 million this year and who has a few more years left on his deal. Is that something that the Warriors want to do? Because if they bring in Malik Monk, then they probably have to trade someone else like a Buddy Hield or a Moses Moody, who aren't making as much as Monk and aren't committed as much money to them long term. And so is Malik Monk a player who they want to bring in and be committed to? Or can they find a third team for Malik Monk? Because the Warriors have all these players lined up that they want to sign, like Al Horford and DeAnthony Melton. And so bringing in Malik Monk's contract, that would change things a little bit. But at the same time, if they decide to keep Jonathan Kuminga, they would probably be paying Jonathan Kuminga more than Monk is even making. So they probably have to make some changes anyways. And that's the part that's interesting to me, and the part from the Warriors' perspective that I don't really understand. Why are the Warriors even trying to keep Kuminga? That's one thing that is interesting to me, because the Warriors don't seem to want to keep Malik Monk because they don't view him as a fit for the team and don't want to be committed to that money. But then why are you even willing to pay Jonathan Kuminga like $75 million over 3 years? Because Jonathan Kuminga clearly doesn't fit. And so from the Warriors' perspective, I don't really understand what the Warriors are doing. It just seems like the Warriors are kind of a mess right now. As a Kings fan, I understand what it looks like when when an organization doesn't look like they are all unified in what they want to do. Because that's really what it seems like. Steve Kerr doesn't want Jonathan Kuminga because he doesn't seem like he fits on the team. Jonathan Kuminga does not fit on with what the Warriors want to do. Kuminga doesn't want to be there. He doesn't fit on the team. But the ownership or whatever, they want to keep Jonathan Kuminga for whatever reason. So it's interesting. Like, you have this player in Kuminga who doesn't fit on the Warriors, but they're still willing to pay him over $20 million. But then they don't want to keep Monk for $18 million, who also, doesn't seem to fit on the team. But from the Warriors' perspective, it really seems like they want to move Malik Monk to a third team. And so that's what everything comes down to. Can the Kings and the Warriors find this third team to be able to move Malik Monk to make this deal work? For whatever reason, the Warriors don't see Monk as a fit for them. I mean, Steph Curry is a small guard who, at his age, probably, not a great defender. And so Malik Monk in a similar situation there in terms of being a small guard who can't defend. Malik Monk also had an inefficient scoring year, doesn't shoot the three ball really well. So, maybe the Warriors view a player like Buddy Hield as a better fit because he spaces the floor and is just a catch and shoot shooter. And Moses Moody is like a two-way young player they don't want to give up on. It's like, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. You don't want Malik Monk because he doesn't fit what you're trying to do offensively and he isn't a great defender. But how does the rest of the league value Malik Monk? From what we've heard, it doesn't seem like Malik Monk has much value around the league. The only team that seemed to be interested was the Detroit Pistons. they were interested, obviously, in the Dennis Schroeder sign and trade situation. That didn't end up happening, maybe because the Kings wanted to keep Monk's contract to be able to trade for Jonathan Kuminga. But that didn't happen. The Pistons have moved on with other players. So no one really wants Malik Monk right now. In today's NBA, these small guards just aren't very valued, these offensive small guards. The meta always shifts in the NBA, but right now with the current CBA, teams are worried about who they're spending their money on, so they can't justify spending all this money on a player who only plays on one side of the ball, who also isn't even a great three-point shooter. And so that's why Monk's value isn't very high. Now, I think, at some point in the NBA, the pendulum will swing the other way, because that's what happens with the meta in the NBA. It swings one way, then it swings back at least slightly. So at some point, a player like Malik Monk will probably gain some value again, but today is not that day. In today's NBA, the name of the game is versatility, two-way players, and of course that makes sense. Who wouldn't want, two-way players who can play both sides of the ball, who can shoot the 3-and-D players, right? You saw it with OKC, just having a bunch of great defensive players. Malik Monk doesn't really fit that description. The meta will eventually swing at least slightly back the other way, but right now, that's just not the reality of the situation. I think Malik Monk is a good enough offensive player to justify, some team can justify bringing him in. So I think there's some team that should look into bringing him in, because I think he can be an absolute game changer. I think one thing that's really hurting Monk's value is he got hurt at very inopportune times in the past 2 seasons. You look at last season, him not being healthy at the end of the season. I don't think he really would have made much of a difference last season because the Kings were kind of just a mess. But go back 2 seasons, go back to 2024, when he got injured at the end of that season, it destroyed the Kings. The Kings didn't make the playoffs, and they collapsed at the end of the season because Malik Monk got injured. That's how important Monk was to the Kings' offense. If he is healthy for that game in the play-in against the Pelicans, I think the Kings are going to win that game. And I think they make the playoffs. Or if he's just healthy towards the end of the season, I think the Kings do make the playoffs. In 2023, in the playoffs, Malik Monk was maybe the second best player on the Kings in a 7-game series against the defending champion Golden State Warriors. I mean, the Warriors saw that happen, and they still don't value Malik Monk. Maybe Monk was the third best player, but if he was a close third. And so my point is, I think Malik Monk's a big game player. And while I understand he was inefficient last year, his role was kind of all over the place. And so I think that was one of the problems. He was inefficient scoring the ball, but I think he can make a big enough impact in big moments for a team to be able to justify paying him $18 million, even if he isn't the archetype of player that is super valued in the NBA. And that's why I think at some point the pendulum will swing the other way in the NBA to start valuing offensive players like Malik Monk a little more. Again, maybe, it's not going to swing all the way back where, just two-way players aren't even valued. That's never going to happen, of course. But I think the pendulum will swing a little bit the other way, because in games that matter, right? It comes down to the playoffs. It's just like moments decide your season. And if a player like Malik Monk gets hot and can make big shots and big plays, and he's also a great passer in the pick and roll, obviously, I think that can be valued. And I think some team that takes a chance on Malik Monk could be very happy. But it doesn't seem like any team really is willing to take that chance right now. And that's the holdup for this entire situation. So right now, it seems like the Warriors are picking between keeping Jonathan Kuminga on a pretty big contract, a player who doesn't fit and who doesn't want to be there, versus taking Malik Monk, who also is on a contract that they don't seem to want to pay, and keeping him as a player who also doesn't fit, at least from their perspective, it seems like. Or they could try to, move him to the third team like we've been talking about, but that doesn't seem to be a possibility. Maybe they can find a way to do it, but it seems like it would have already happened if it was going to happen. If I were the Warriors, I think I would take Malik Monk and move on from the Kuminga situation, because Kuminga obviously doesn't want to be there and he doesn't fit. So you take Malik Monk, who can still be a contributor to them. And I would maybe try to trade Buddy Hield. I mean, replacing Buddy Hield with Malik Monk, we know as Kings fans, that works out pretty well. Malik Monk is a much better player than Buddy Hield. I know Buddy Hield had a big game in the playoffs last year, but Malik Monk replacing Buddy Hield sounds pretty nice. So, it's interesting from the Warriors that they really are not willing to take Malik Monk, but are also willing to keep Jonathan Kuminga. And I think that's just the Warriors not being unified as an organization and kind of being a mess. And again, as a Kings fan, I can recognize that type of mess from an organization very easily because I've been watching it my entire life. Kuminga just doesn't seem willing to be able to accept the role that the Warriors want him to accept. And so, well, then you might ask, well, why do the Kings want someone like that who isn't willing to accept that role? Does it work for the Kings any better? And so, while I've given my thoughts on Kuminga before, I'll just do a quick refresh on them here. The Kings are a better situation for Kuminga because the Kings do not have the pressure of the Steph Curry timeline, for one, right? They're not trying to win a championship right now. The Kings are probably going to go into a rebuild in the next 1 or 2 years, or at least overhaul the roster. And so the Kings don't need to fit Kuminga into a slot that he perfectly fits in because there's just no player or system that you're building around in the next couple of years for the Kings. The Warriors, they have a system. They want to slot in a player that fits into that system, which again is probably why they don't want Malik Monk or Jonathan Kuminga, or at least don't want to pay those players a bunch of money if they don't perfectly fit into their system. The Kings don't have that system, so they can kind of put Kuminga wherever they want. Kuminga can be a great offensive player when he's able to get downhill either with the ball in his hands or as a cutter. When things get stagnant, he can become a bit of a liability offensively. Same on the defensive end. Sometimes he's a good defensive player when he's on ball or when he's engaged, but sometimes things get stagnant for him. He can, turn the brain off a little bit and becomes a liability defensively. So he's a flawed player. There's no doubt about that. He's a flawed player. But he's also a player, I think, who could be a good risk for the Kings at the right price. And so for the Kings, they don't have a lot to lose by trading for Jonathan Kuminga. Malik Monk is probably someone who's getting traded anyways, even though it'd be sad to see Monk go. It's not a big deal for the long term of the Kings, future of the franchise if Malik Monk is traded for Jonathan Kuminga. The one thing I will say is Kuminga is not the type of player that you give up an unprotected first round pick for. That's the one mistake that I don't want the Kings to make. Don't give up the unprotected first round pick because the Kings are in a position where it looks like they're going to have to go into a full tank in the next couple of years, right? That's the trajectory that the Kings are on. So you don't give up unprotected first round picks in that situation, especially for a guy like Kuminga, who is not necessarily that star player and who is a flawed player. If Kuminga buys into the right role, he could be a great pickup for the Kings. If he doesn't, he could be an absolute disaster. Because the whole storyline around Jonathan Kuminga is that he's been unwilling to accept the right role with the Warriors. Now, some of that is the Warriors' fault for not valuing him. And just, the Warriors have made a mess of things for a while now. But some of it is also on him on not accepting the correct role and not trying to shape his game in a way that will help the team best. And so if he is unwilling to do that as well on the Kings, it could be a big disaster. And so I just think he's the type of guy who you don't give up an unprotected first for. And if the price just gets too high for him, you can walk away. He's not the type of player who you need to be worried about like being the one that got away. It's okay to walk away from a flawed player like Kuminga. He could be a nice get if you do get him for the right price, but it's okay to just walk away. The Warriors are the ones with the pressure in this situation because they have the timeline of Steph Curry, and they are trying to win right now. The Kings also kind of trying to win right now, but that's just the position the Kings have always been in, and the Kings don't have the pressure of winning around Steph Curry and are, again, probably looking at a complete roster overhaul and probably going into a tank pretty soon. So they can just wait out the contracts on the team and go into that rebuild if they don't get Kuminga. Kuminga is not the player who's going to turn around the franchise. So it's just there's not a lot of pressure from the Kings to get this type of deal done. So if the Warriors want to take Malik Monk, then great, the deal can be done. If the Warriors find a third team for him, if some third team values him and wants Malik Monk, then great. If not, then it's okay to just walk away. It has been very interesting though, like all the talking point about Malik Monk's value just over the last couple of years with him signing that contract. And now obviously the Kings trying to trade him for Jonathan Kuminga and him just not being valued around the NBA. I understand it. Like I said, I understand he is a flawed player as well, definitely. But I do think there is a team out there who could be very happy if they traded for him because he's an amazing player that if fit into the right situation, if that contract can be fit into the right situation for a team, could be an absolute game changer off the bench for a team and be a massive piece. Because like I said, he was maybe the second best player for the Kings in a playoff series. So I think he's a big game player. And while I understand teams' hesitancy, I think he could be a very valuable player for a team still, and is still worth that contract that was given to him. And if he is still on the Kings next year, I'm ready for a big bounce back year from Malik Monk, and I'm very excited for it. So anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back tomorrow to recap Kings Media Day, which I'm very excited for. The Kings basketball season is almost back. Media Day is the signal that the NBA season is starting up again, so I'm very excited about that. So I will see you guys then. Peace.